When I was 7 years old, we lived in Peru in a little mining camp called Toc-Ipala, which I believe was south of Tacna, Peru. And on one occasion, I managed to persuade my mother to let me walk from the American camp up to the headquarters, where the headquarters offices and the hospital and things like that. And so at 7 years old, I climbed up the mountain. I don't think there was any path. And I saw wild burros, and they really scared me because I was 7. And made it to the top and found my way to the bus stop, got on the bus, rode the bus back down to the bottom. And in my 50s, I mentioned this to my mother, and she said, yeah, there were 3 or 4 things I really regretted about raising you, and letting you do that was at the top of the list. Well, I think that it's valuable for a kid to go off on adventures like that. In Kennewick, there's a new Highway 395 that goes pretty much straight up the canyon to the top of the hill, where you can look down over the Tri-Cities, and then from up there you can see into Oregon and Mount Hood. Well, in probably 1966, I had a brand new Schwinn Varsity 10-speed, and I rode that bike from Perry Loop in Kennewick to the top of that hill on the old Highway 395, and then down again. My brother and I, we just used to take off on long adventures. We used to walk from Perry Loop to downtown Richland, about 11 miles, to hang out with our nephew, or cousin, I guess. What was he? Yeah, he's our nephew, Bobby, or later young Duncan. Anyway, so, and then in my 40s, I rented a 30-foot racing sloop after about a 3-hour, 2-hour lesson in how to sail on a 14-foot boat that had this gigantic torpedo at the bottom of the dagger board, so that there was no way in hell that boat would ever tip over. Well, that's what I learned on. Then I rented this guy's 30-foot racing sloop, and the wind came up, and I ran up the sails, and that boat went like spit on a griddle, and my 7-month pregnant wife was screaming, and the 6-year-old and the 8-year-old were screaming, and nobody wanted to end up in the cold Columbia River, and it was a shit storm. Well, anyway, so I have savored in my life those out on the edge kinds of experiences, like climbing the hill when I was 7 years old. Now, what happens when you take a kid who's got that kind of impulse and you box him in and you don't let him do stuff like that? Well, my little brother was a screw up from day one. I think he was 7 years old when he and a buddy broke into the Coca-Cola bottling factory and shared one bottle of pop. The cops took him down and showed him the jail, hoping to scare some Jesus into him. It didn't take. He later was arrested for juggling, tipping over a Coca-Cola dispensing machine. There are people actually died from doing that, where the machine tips over on them, squashes them, they die. Anyway, so my parents went to juvenile court and labeled him, for the sake of the judge, they labeled my brother incorrigible. He was definitely incorrigible. Now, I would suggest that it may have been the difference between my brother, the incorrigible drug addict, drunk, seldom held a decent job, mostly lived off women his whole life, finally died of emphysema from smoking and working as a painter, versus his older brother, year and a half older, who becomes an attorney, and here I sit on the lovely shores of Star Lake. The difference between us was that I found opportunities to be a wild jackass, and he didn't, and his life was confined, and so he became a wild jackass in the illegal domain. That some bitch, he was illegal much of his life. So give some consideration to, if you've got kids that are sort of, on the wild side, maybe give them some slack, give them some distance to go out and experience, test their innovative abilities to take care of themselves.